So what is tone? In a musical sense, tone is near everything. Um, in a conceptual way, I would say tone is similar to love in that, when things are going well, you're highly motivated to do your best work and things roll along very smoothly, almost effortlessly. When things break down, things are a struggle and you have to work very hard to make things happen at all, or you have to work much harder to get a desired result. Visually speaking, tone is, I guess, similar to the way water comes out of a hose when you put your finger or thumb over the nozzle. How you can direct the flow and you can control the stream in different ways. You can fan it out, or you can get it to spray further, or whatever, something like that. That's probably the closest thing I can think of that is similar to tone. But yeah, it's a mysterious kind of thing that's hard to describe. But you can definitely hear when somebody has good tone or less desirable tone. Obviously, everybody has their own opinion and position of what is good tone or bad tone, but there's definitely some common area there. But in this discussion and demonstration, I'll do my best to show you some techniques, some tools of the trade to help you find a consistent tone, something that you like, that motivates you to pick up your instrument more and to play better, and how to find that on an array of different amplifiers. The context in which I'm going to be demonstrating and specifically discussing is related to early electric blues of the 40s and up to the early 50s. For example, guys like John Lee Williamson, Sonny Boy Williamson, Muddy Waters, Jimmy Rogers, Little Walter, Babyface Leroy Foster, Snooky Pryor, Moody and Floyd Jones, Robert Jr. Lockwood. These are some of the names and styles that reflect the early electric blues styles that I'm talking about. Despite popular belief, achieving good tone is more complicated than just cranking your amp or buying the latest effects pedal or something like that. You have control in your right hand technique to affect tone and volume and changing dynamics. All that is done with the right hand technique. I'll be covering how tone changes, things that are in your control that you can change and manipulate, and things that are out of your control or you have very little control of. Some equipment used, and techniques you can use to shape and alter your tone. So starting on the equipment side of things, with guitars first, most guys were using, archtop, hollow body guitars like this. This is I think, mid 30s Cromwell. It's a Gibson made guitar branded as a Cromwell. Really cool guitar with check binding and whatnot. But, Gibson, Silvertone, Harmony, K, those are some of the brands you'd be looking for. So here's another example. This is a Bruno. This is a K-made guitar from the late 40s. Similar, archtop as the previous example. But guys would get, they called them a monkey on a stick, DeArmond pickups that they could mount on their existing guitar to make it an electric guitar. They could plug into an amplifier. All these had were one knob, for volume. I think a little bit later on, they had a fancier model, the Rhythm Chief, that had both tone and volume back here. But most of the guys just had this single knob version, very simple. And, guys would typically run them as far forward as you could. but sometimes there isn't room to get the pickup that high up the guitar. So you know, you run them as far back as you can until they, you know, interfere with the string. So on this one, I had to run it all the way back here by the bridge. And this guitar is quickly becoming my favorite guitar. Despite owning all those cool vintage guitars, you know, this is, I think, a last year's model Gretsch Genricke. It looks vintage. It sounds very close to the DeArmond setups on the old Archtops to me. It's very lightweight, and I really enjoy the 3/4 scale aspect of it, especially for playing, you know, solo and duo gigs and things like that. You know, where I do a lot of the, you know, songs in the key of E and A with using a lot of open strings, and not have to cover more real estate than I need to be able to alternate between single strings, chords, double stops, and open notes. I can do that all right there. I don't have to move my hand so much, so I can bounce around pretty effortlessly. It's a great little guitar. I think these go for around $200 to $250. I mean, you just can't beat a guitar that sounds good acoustically and amplified for that kind of money. And it goes along the same lines as what those guys were doing back then with the mail order catalog guitars, you know, silver tones and harmonies and whatnot, Ks. As far as amplifiers, I'll show you a couple examples of things I own. Here's a Gretsch Electromatic. This has a single 10-inch speaker. It's a good volume, a good overall size for solo, duo, trio gigs, possibly with, you know, some brushes or a very light drummer you could also get away with. It's probably in the, I don't know, I'm guessing 10 to 12 watt range. Here's another example. This is probably a little quieter. This is a Premier 50 from the late 40s. I think it has a 6 or 8-inch speaker in it. Really great tone. Again, for, you know, solo, duo, trio kind of stuff like the early blues guys, you know, generally played, you know, drumless, you know, piano, guitar, harp kind of stuff. Here's an Oahu, really cool amp. It's got like the mustache handle on it. This is from the 30s, I believe. Very old amp. It's got, looks like maybe an 8-inch Rolla in there. No tone knob, just volume only and a couple of channels. This is probably more on the, like, the, you know, 5 to 8 watt range. Very cool amp. This is kind of the big brother to the Gretsch Electromatic amp that I showed you earlier. This has got a single 12 in it. This is a large cabinet even for a 12-inch speaker. So it has a lot of bass response to it, sometimes too much for me, but I like to use it for vocals and for different things like that. It's got the cool refrigerator handle on it. This is an old PA system from the late 40s. It's a Challenger. It's an 18 watt amp, but you know, I really like these because you can use different speaker combinations and get different sounds. And if you use a really inefficient speaker, you can get these to break up much earlier than the 18 watts. So pretty cool amp. And usually you can get these, especially a while back, you could get these for very cheap compared to, you know, Fender or Gibson, where you're now spending thousands for an amp this old. You know, you can get these for, used to be a couple $100. Now it's probably $500-600, but you might be able to find a deal and get something like this for $300, $400, even still. Here's another PA system from the late 40s, early 50s. This is a Masco MA17, really cool amplifier. And again, you know, you can plug this into whatever speaker cabinet you want and you know, get different volumes, different tones. So that's a pretty cool feature. And again, much cheaper than the combo amps. Here's an example of a speaker cabinet that you can use for the PA systems. This is probably late 40s, early 50s. This is an Allied Knight speaker cabinet. This is just one side. They came with two halves that you could put together, and they had latches on the sides that you could connect them and lock them in place, and then the PA would just slide in the bottom down here. I think this at some point the speaker blew up, so I put a Weber Signature Series, just a cheapy speaker, but sounds great. It's a 12-inch speaker. But I have some other like cheaper speakers that I can put in there and get it to even break up earlier. But this gives me like basically like a 12 to 15 watt, you know, a great amp that I can use for most of my gigs. And here's kind of the little brother to that one. This is an Allied Knight with just a single speaker. And then like I explained earlier, this one doesn't have two halves, but just a back that comes off. It's got an 8-inch speaker in there, and then the original PA system that fits in the bottom, which is pretty cool. You probably have, you know, 5 to 10 watt PA system, but you can plug into it and use it as an amp, and it's, you know, a lot cheaper than a combo amp, you know, from this era, and you know, typically, and it sounds great. Here's an Allied Knight PA system from the 40s. You can see the record player on top, but this is what the guys used in the clubs, things like this, and they would go off to the speakers that would be mounted on the wall or up on the piano. But they can also be used as harp and guitar amplifiers. Here's a pretty cool, this is a Masco mixer, 4-channel mixer. Has an end that just plugs into the amp, and then you can run, you know, up to 4 things and control the volume from this little box, which is pretty cool. You know, I try to keep things as simple as possible. A lot of times I'll do vocals, guitar, and my stomp board through the same amplifier, and then I can just plug in to here and control them, you know, from the box. If you're into busking and you don't have power, you know, something like this is pretty cool. This is a Pignose Hognose 20. It comes with these large battery packs, and you can plug in to the wall and charge them, and you get, you know, several hours out of this thing on that charge, and you can just keep doing it over and over and over. And you know, I know the vintage guys will kind of frown upon this, but you know, I'm about as vintage as they come, and this thing sounds great to me. I can get really close to my tube sound, and you know, in something this small and convenient, and to be able to take it anywhere, it's a really cool amp. And here's the smaller version of that Pignose. This is just a real tiny, like, little practice amp for around the house. You know, it opens up. You know, you can kind of change the tone a little bit by how much you open this. But you know, just one thing. But I can even use the mixer for this. I can plug this, you know, into the mixer and do, you know, vocals, guitar, and stomp board through this little thing, and it sounds pretty darn cool for low volume, you know, at home stuff, or even recording or whatever. It's for a new, you know, cheap way to go. It's pretty cool little amplifier. The guys in the 40s and early 50s, you know, big amps weren't available, and they weren't playing loud enough to really justify anything larger. You know, a 10 to 12 watt amp, 15 watt max, you know, was all they needed. You know, a lot of times they'd put them on top of the piano, so it could cut through, you know, if they did have a full band with drums and whatnot. Here's a few examples of amps that guys were using back then, you know, up on the piano, Dan Electros and Mascos and things like that. For the guitar side of things, I'd stick with, Gibson or some of the mail order companies like Silvertone, K, Harmony, things like that. And for amplifiers, I'd stick with Gibson and also some of the mail order companies, Silvertone, K, Harmony, Dan Electro, Premier, National, things like that. They're all great amplifier companies. All those are going to give you a very, a great vintage tone. I prefer amps in that like 5 to 12 range sound the best tone wise. If you need something a little louder, I would definitely stick under 20 watts. You can get up into that 15 to 18 watt range would be probably my max. Any louder than that and they can have it. I have no desire to play in these, 40, 60 watt amps. So going back to the example I used earlier with the hose and the water, if you just turn the faucet on and water comes out the end of the hose, that's like sounding a note on the guitar. There's nothing to it. There's nothing interesting about it, right? But to build up the power and energy and have that control and strength, to be able to harness that and to unleash it at will, and to be able to balance that push-pull and use some different techniques to change the tone to fit the mood of the song or the mood of the part of the song that you're trying to play something, is how you build tone, how you use tone in a song, and you can use different techniques to keep it interesting, not only for yourself, but for the listener. Much like speaking and communicating, you want to vary your volume, you want to vary your tone, you want to vary your delivery. Sometimes you can do a flurry of notes. Sometimes you can push, forward and play on the front of the beat. Sometimes you can draw back and pull and play on the back of the beat. Sometimes you can leave a lot of space. Sometimes you can put a lot of notes in there for impact. And there's different techniques you can use to create different sounds and different tones. So some terms that you might hear that are commonly associated with good tone would be like warm, dark, mellow, woody, smooth, raw. Some things that would typically be associated with a less desirable tone would be thin, brittle, bright, shrill or cold, harsh, flat, things like that. And some of those things, even though they're typically not desirable, even those, when used in the right scenario, can also be effective. And if you had, for example, 100 different guitar players lined up using the same guitar, the same strings, the same amplifier, the same settings, everything the same, they would all sound different. There's so many things that go into building a tone and things that affect tone. And although I do think that you should build your amplified tone parallel to your acoustic tone, because they're kind of two separate things, most of the time I play acoustically. I think developing a great acoustic tone is the foundation for having a great amplified tone. If you look back at Little Walter, he was a great acoustic player long before he ever put a harmonica up to a microphone and played it amplified. And that's what separated him from many of his contemporaries and guys today that go straight to the amplifier instead of building that great acoustic tone first. Amplification is a great tool to be able to go all the way from acoustic and have this whole spectrum of sound and volume all the way up to like a roaring kind of Willie Johnson kind of tone, all the way down to acoustic and everything in between. Another thing you can do when you're exploring these different things is, um, if you hear a tone that you really like on record, um, try to emulate that tone. Try to get as close as you can to it, and do that with several different styles, several different guys that you enjoy their playing, and see how close you can get. And just in that process, you'll learn some different things and things that you can kind of combine and kind of start to structure your own sound. As far as I can tell, it sure seems like there's two basic camps and philosophies of how to play this music. On one side, you have the people who really get into the theory and um, the fretboard knowledge, and they like to play a lot of melody lines, and they like to play a lot of notes. And then you have the other camp, which is where I come from, where you play economically, you play very few notes. Um, it's more about tone and economy and groove and playing simply, and that's what I'm hearing on, at least from the guys that I listen to. It's easy to become fascinated with somebody's left hand, the notes that they're fretting. But like I've said several times already, and I'll keep repeating it, it's the right hand where the magic comes from. All the tone, all the touch, all the nuances, all the attack is right here in the right hand. That can control volume, tone, dynamics, everything is right here. Some things that affect your tone that are largely out of your control are things like, is it an indoor gig or an outdoor gig? If it's indoors, what are some of the surfaces? Are they hard surfaces? Are they surfaces that are going to absorb the sound? Are they going to bounce off and reflect? Does it have low ceilings, or does it have vaulted ceilings? Um, the distance from the stage to the audience, the size of the audience, the width of the room, the length of the room. These things all come into play, and it can make finding your tone challenging. I mean, you could practice all afternoon in your living room, and you think you have your sound, you know, completely together, and you're just loving the way things sound. You get to the gig, and it sounds completely different, and you're like, what happened? And these are some of the things that can make that change for you. Things that are completely out of your control, that also affect the tone is, your hand size, the size of your fingers and thumb, and your wrist strength, and all these things come into play. Another thing that affects your perceived tone, and the way the tone is perceived by the audience is, how many musicians do you have in the band? Is it a solo? Is it a duo? Is it a trio? Is it with a drummer, without a drummer? And how are all these things layered on top of each other? That's all going to affect how you sound. Some things that also affect your tone that you do have control of, that are more on the gear aspect of things, are the size of your speaker and your amplifier, the size of your amplifier and the size of the cabinet. Is it an open back or a closed back cabinet? Are you using your fingers and thumb, or are you using a flat pick or thumb and finger picks? The settings on your amplifier, the type of instrument you're using, an Archtop versus, an early electric guitar, or the pickup type, is it a DeArmond or is it a P90? These things are all gear related things that are going to affect your tone. And starting out and focusing on your acoustic tone is really the way to go. If you try to fast forward and skip those steps, and you go straight to amplified, and you only play amplified, it's going to mask and hide a lot of weaknesses and things that you need to develop and work on and give you an artificial sense of accomplishment, which in small doses to keep you motivated, to keep you going, are great things. But just don't let that discrepancy get too wide, where your actual acoustic tone is down here and your perception of your amplified tone is way up here, and you forget about this and leave this behind, and now you're way up here stuck, and you're missing all this stuff underneath. In my mind, most blues bands today are playing, far too loud, using really big amps, hard-hitting drums, and all the nuances that make this music so great just go out the wash. And if you look at some of the pictures I posted earlier in this video, and there's many others, in the 40s and 50s, these guys are using, 10 to 15 watt amplifiers, sometimes higher up on the piano, but often just down the floor in front of them. And the PA systems that they were using were like 15 to 25 watts, and those feed back really early when you're singing through them. So the volume was not high. In my opinion, an upright piano should be the bass volume for a band. If you have piano, harp, and guitar and drums, for instance, they should all be down here and the vocals are up here. And the different instruments can come forward but then fall back, and maybe for your solo you come up to match the volume of the vocalist, but then you're back down here to the bass volume. But when it's time for the piano player to take his solo and he's buried in the mix, then you're playing too loud. And if you're playing a larger venue, or an outdoor venue, where there's a large audience and there's a lot of room to fill up, and you need more volume, keep your stage volume relatively the same, and just mic everything and push that out to the audience as is necessary. But your stage volume shouldn't be way up here. Keep that so everything is pretty consistent. And solo, duo, trio, drumless gigs, you can bring that volume even down further. Play as low as you can. You can always come up, but have your bass volume here, so that you can both go down and up from there. The more volume involved, the harder it is to control the sound. The less volume, the easier it is to control the volume. And the more dynamics you're going to have, the more nuances you can add to the music. So the lower you can play, the better in my mind. I always try to keep my setup as simple as possible. The fewest moving parts possible, less to buy, less to carry, less to forget, break, maintain, or interfere with your tone. And the less pieces you have in your chain from your guitar to your amplifier, and the fewer knob adjustments you make, and the more you rely on your right hand to do volume, tone, and dynamics, the more consistently you'll be able to find your tone. All right, so I'm going to do this demonstration on my Challenger. This is as loud as I'll ever play. This is an 18 watt amp through the cabinet I showed earlier, the Allied Knight with the 12-inch in it. So if you play a chord, and you can get this, up before it starts feeding back. See, for example, if I do, ninth chord, it starts feeding back if I leave it open, right? So you're too loud. So come back down a little bit. Less, but you're still feeding back some. Just a little bit there. That's pretty good. And this works with a hollow body guitar. If you have a solid body guitar, you're gonna be able to turn up way louder. It's gonna be a different process. You're gonna be way too loud. So by doing that, you've kind of set your ceiling for as loud as you possibly can play. And we're gonna keep adjusting, but now the ceiling is set. So next, I look for a tone that's kind of middle of the road, that I can it's low enough that I can get the frequency under the harp so it doesn't interfere with other instruments, but enough punch and treble that, you know, when I take a solo, if I want to make a point, a strong point, I have enough bite there that I can do so. I'm looking for kind of one tone that I can do everything with as a bass line. In most amplifiers, we'll just have a tone knob, you know, that goes from 0 to 10 or whatever. This particular amp has 4 different distinct settings, going from deep bass, mellow, crisp, and brilliant. Deep bass is probably too low. You know, it'd be fine by itself under the harp and in a supportive role, but you know, for lead stuff, it's a little dark. It'd work in some things, but again, I want to set it so I have some ceiling there to work with. So I'll go up, you know, I usually go probably on the 3rd setting to crisp, you know. That's enough treble for me. So I want to be able to play lightly and have good tone definition. And I want to be able to, when I dig in, get a nice distorted tone. When I hit a chord. So that would be my ceiling. I prefer a setup with no effects and no reverb or anything. I like, as soon as I stop the note, I like it to just decay naturally, so I can get in and out and have that pause immediately after. You know, the tendency with modern players, harp players, and guitar players, especially harp players, is a really bassy tone. I think because their amp breaks up more that way. But you know, it's really muddy. You don't have a lot of definition. You don't have a lot of variance in tone. So I prefer to get that sometimes, but I like the headroom to be able to get a brighter tone when desired. You know, you want to be able to do an assortment of tones and volumes and dynamics, all with your touch. You know, you don't want to play all distorted all the time. You don't want to play all soft all the time. Nothing, you know, all the time. You know, mix it up and you know, for yourself and for the listener, and to convey what the song calls for. So now we have our amp set. We want to check the range of volume and tone that we have without touching any knobs, just all in the right hand technique and attack. So for example, in the key of A, if we were doing something, you know, we can do something in a supportive roll. All the way that low up to, you know, on the high side. Like that. So now we've checked you know, things on the quiet side. So that's our floor, okay? Almost acoustic, you know, and I could probably even play a little quieter if I had to. But I mean, that's whisper quiet. Okay, now, I mean, we can play something. We want to check the ceiling. Okay, so, you know, if in a supportive roll where it's really driving and you want to, you know, really thump on things, you can. You know, louder and more distorted. And on the high side of things, you know. So that was all done with my thumb and fingers. You know, you can also use a pick and conceal that in your hand for special moments or a special effect, or if you need more treble or volume or a different sound, you can bring that out. And so this is, you know, the ceiling I have with a pick. thing you can do is once you're set up, you can, if you have a decently long cord, 10 to 20 feet, you can walk out from the stage, 10, 15 feet left to the right and straight back, and do a little bit of playing. And how does it sound out there versus, next to your amplifier? A lot of guys these days like a real heavy bass response. I prefer, a really inefficient speaker with an open back cabinet that the bass response just kind of farts out. It's not pushing too much air. It just kind of dissipates for more of a well-rounded sound that breaks up an early volume. Once you establish that low floor and high ceiling, you really want to protect those extremes. Those are reserved for special moments in the song. If you start playing with a hard attack, now your ceiling is your normal, and now you have no ability. You've lost the ability to increase the intensity or volume or amount of distortion. You're just maxed out the whole time. You don't want to do that. You want to play kind of middle attack so that you can both go down from there to play softer and quieter and more clear, and you can go up for more volume, more intensity, more distortion. Play right there in the middle. That's your bass line. So I'm plugged into the pig nose now. I went through the same steps I showed you with the larger amp. We're just playing a little quieter. Everything's scaled down. Same process. I set the ceiling. I set the floor. I set the lows and highs. So now you can see how that transfers over to a smaller amp. So on the quiet end of things, okay, and on the high, nice and clean and crisp, and whisper quiet, And this thing will go all the way up to really distorted. This is a cheap battery-powered amplifier, solid state, so it gets some funky, distorted tones sometimes. But I mean, for something so portable, you don't even need power. You can busk and stuff. I mean, this gets pretty close to my my louder amp at a much lower volume. It's easy to fall in love with, somebody's left hand. That's the one that you see moving up and down the fretboard and making all the chords and making all the melodies. But it's really the right hand that has control of the attack, the touch, the volume, and the tone. Everything is really right here in the right hand. If you think about the ways that you can change the sound with your left hand, other than, changing the note. But, if you're doing, there's not really much you can do as far as just playing that one note with your left hand. But your right hand, there's infinite things you can do to change how that note sounds. So inherently, wind instruments are much closer to a vocalist. Using your diaphragm, and you're pushing air up the same way. A guitar is a percussion instrument, so it's completely different. So you have to use different techniques if you want to try to get some vocal qualities in your playing. With vocals and with any wind instruments, you can build that pressure and release it and do different things with it to change the tone and the volume and different things. So it's much different on the guitar. And going back to the water and the hose analogy, it's very similar in that you're building pressure, and then you can manipulate that pressure and release it in different ways. I'm not a harmonica player, but I've supported many, and like tongue blocking, how you're pushing more energy. There's more energy behind the note that way. Similar to vocals or any wind instrument, you're able to generate a lot of strength behind that note and then control what you want to let out. So there's some different techniques you can use on the guitar that aren't going to give you the same result as that, but they can kind of imitate that feel where you're building up pressure and that push-pull balance of building pressure, releasing pressure, building tension, releasing tension. And I find, by using your thumb and fingers versus a flat pick, you have a lot more variety of sound, and you can build a lot more energy into the note in different ways than you can with a flat pick. A flat pick is going to give you more volume, more clarity, more precision, which there's a place for that. But obviously the advantage of 5 versus 1 is obvious, and if you want to play in a way where you're supporting yourself and more like a piano, using your thumb and fingers allows you to do that. Not that you're going to use all 5, but I all the time at least use my thumb and 2 fingers and possibly my 4th finger sometimes, but definitely these 3. So that's a clear advantage, for supporting yourself and being able to do more than with just a flat pick. I started out on a flat pick. I think most players do, because that's what you see most players out there when you go to gigs and shows. That's what most guys are using these days. But at some point, I decided that, hey, I want to get serious about this, and I want to start, using my fingers and thumb. And it was a big step back, but ultimately it propels you very far forward. So it's a little bit of a sacrifice when you've progressed using a pick and you now want to be able to use your thumb and fingers. It's a little bit of a setback, but in the end, you're going to be much better off. Some things that you can do differently to get different sounds right off the bat. Obviously, like I've been discussing, using your fingers and thumb versus a flat pick, and where you pick on the strings. Closer to the bridge is going to be brighter, and further up the neck, closer to the nut, is going to give you a darker sound. And that's a great tool. You can change the tone by just where you pick the strings. For example, if I'm playing up here, I'll be in the key of E now. It's real dark, and lower volume and real mellow. It's great for playing behind something, You can play back here, a little brighter. Using your fingers, up here, is real mellow, and you can get back here closer to the bridge, and it's going to give you a brighter sound. And using a pick, if you pick back here by the bridge, you can get a really bright sound. Like guys like T-Bone Walker would do that a lot. Versus up here. In my opinion, the goal should be to play in a way that has vocal qualities. You know, it should sound similar to a voice. And if you're backing somebody singing, the phrasing and the tones should kind of mimic what they're doing. You know, I see a lot of times guys are playing these really intricate melodies and things that are just way different than what the vocalist is doing. I don't get that. That doesn't make sense to me. You know, I'd much rather hear somebody play simple and follow, you know, something that's closer to the vocals. Something you can do as a learning tool is when you find some vocalists that you really like, possibly to model your own vocals after, you can try to play guitar lines behind that vocalist as they're singing, and you'll slowly pick up some vocal qualities to your playing. And if you do end up singing that way yourself, now your guitar lines will be right in line with your singing, and they'll go hand in hand. They'll complement each other. Examples of things that you can do on the guitar that start to emulate, you know, have some vocal qualities to them is, you know, bending notes, right? So if we're back in the key of A, and you know, it's building that pressure and tension in a way that sounds very vocal-like. Another thing you can do is to slide up to a note to increase that strength and pressure, and then finally release it. You know, you'd hear Robert Nighthawk a lot, you know, sliding up to notes like that. You know? Also sliding up to chords, or creating movement and that building that pressure and tension. You can also slide down to a note. Another thing you can do is to mute the strings. You can do that with the palm of your hand. So you're just hitting the note and then dampening it with the palm. Okay. Another muting technique you can use is to lift your fretted, the fretted note. You can just lift your finger up. So here it is, you know, hitting the note, and you can lift that up to kill it. I'm not using my palm at all. And you can combine those two techniques, so you can use your palm and lift your fretted finger simultaneously. Another technique you can use that will give you a vocal quality is the vibrato. And a lot of singers in the 40s and 50s didn't use a real heavy vibrato, but it's a good technique to incorporate into your playing. You can, you know, use your first finger. You can, you know, use your third finger. And you can do a fast vibrato, or you can do a slow vibrato. I like a pretty mellow vibrato. Like I said, those guys didn't use a lot of vibrato in their vocals. So those are some of the things you can do using your left hand to change the tone and capture some some vocal qualities to your playing. For guitar strings, I generally use flat wounds or half rounds for warmer sound, and I generally use a heavier gauge, usually 12s. Sometimes I'll replace the G string with an unwound string. And I typically like a higher action than I think most players like to use. I don't like when my strings start buzzing on the frets, and I like I use a lot of open strings, so I really like them to ring out, and I think it promotes economy in your playing. It forces you to work a little bit harder, which is gonna force you to use your notes more selectively and play less, and prevent you from overplaying, overbending, and that kind of thing. I have pretty small hands and wrists. 12s feel really comfortable for me. If you have larger hands and stronger wrists and hands, you could probably go to 13s. If you're a newer player, I'd probably recommend 11s. And as you progress and those feel comfortable, you can try 12s and move up. But I would suggest using the largest gauge string you can. So for your right hand technique, if you think about all the different surfaces you have to use, you can use kind of the pointy end of your finger. You can use a flatter part to your finger. You can use a little bit of nail. You can use a lot of nail. There's a lot of different tones you can achieve through different parts of your finger or thumb that you use. For example, when I'm doing like a 2-string rhythm kind of thing, I'll turn my thumb pretty close to perpendicular to the strings, so I'm almost, I am hitting those bottom 2 strings simultaneously, and it gives you a really nice muted and warm tone that can go under a harp or another instrument really nicely. And again, you can play this further up here for a warmer tone. Real nice and mellow. And I'm stopping that note. I'm lifting my left hand finger to mute, and I'm also dampening it with my finger after I hit it. So I'm stopping that note. It gives it that bounce kind of feel. Versus, if you played it more with the tip of your thumb, it's going to sound much different. Right? And you can also play that back here. To me, it sounds best up here. So not using your tone knob and adjusting your tone by changing your attack, changing where you play on the guitar, up here over the fretboard, or back here by the bridge, or somewhere in between. It's gonna give you the tools, the ability to change your tone without using any knobs. You see a lot of guys that are always fiddling with their knobs, but that stuff can all be done with your right hand. My thumb, I try to get as much flesh and bone behind that string as possible. When you turn your thumb perpendicular to the strings, you can also you're using the side of your fingernail, which gives it, you're not going to tear up your skin as much, and it'll give you a little bit of clarity and durability. Even when I'm playing single notes with my thumb, I'll try to use the side of my nail sometimes. Here's flesh, using flesh versus turning it sideways. It gives it a little bit more brightness, a little bit more clarity. So that's something you can use to change the tone, just using a different part of your thumb. And likewise, you can do the same thing with your fingers. You can use all flesh, or you can turn it kind of sideways and use the side of your nail for a different kind of sound. It's subtle, but it's a different tone. You can also use your fingernail to do like a rake, you know, if you're doing a chord or something and you want a brighter sound versus flesh. Different sound. You can also use this technique to do like tremolo picking. You know, I use my first finger and I just kind of go back and forth like this, you know. And you can do that also with a flat pick. Versus your finger. For a mellower effect, I'll also do tremolo picking like this with my first finger facing forward. Also experiment with upstrokes versus downstrokes. You know, downstrokes you're going to be using your thumb. Upstrokes you're going to be using your first or second finger typically. It's a little brighter versus your thumb. There's more flesh on your thumb, more bone. You can also do a chord rake using, you know, the flesh on your thumb. Real mellow, warm and nice. Versus, you know, an upstroke, you know, with your flesh. A different effect, or your nail, fingernail. So I encourage you to explore and experiment, you know, with different parts of your finger, different parts of your thumb and fingers, in different areas of the neck to try to see how many different sounds you can achieve without using any knobs, any effects, you know, just with your right hand. What different sounds can you create? And use kind of a polarized intensity, you know, like I said before, you know, kind of float at that bass line and reserve, you know, those real quiet moments and those really intense moments for special occasions. For phrasing, you know, there's positive space and negative space. Positive space is when you're playing something. Negative space is when you're not playing at all, or when you're playing down at the bass line or below and letting things breathe. When you play something, that's not absorbed by the listener until you pause, right? So make a statement and then pause or come down low to let the listener absorb and appreciate what you just played. That's where the magic is the moment right after the statement is said. A lot of players, you know, will just keep playing notes and stringing things together, so the listener never has an opportunity to really appreciate and enjoy that wonderful thing you just played. You just canceled yourself out by playing directly after the first thing. And work the space in between the notes. You know, a lot of those guys didn't use a ton of notes, but they worked those little areas in between the notes and got every drop out of what they knew, and every drop out of the notes that they played, which I think really is the essence of the blues, is using the most that you have to work with. We're not all gifted with, you know, some incredible rich voice with this broad range. We're not all equipped with, you know, perfect pitch or the ability to hear all these different melodies. So you have to work with what you have. Repetition is not a bad thing. If you think about some of the biggest names in blues, Muddy and Elmore James and Jimmy Reed and B.B. King, and a lot of these guys use the same licks, the same kind of ideas for their songs, the same solos a lot of times are very similar. they got the most out of what they knew. I think a lot of guys today, you know, with everything going on in the world, you know, everything is going towards more and more complex and adding more and adding more. And, you know, everybody wants to be the GOAT and be the best at everything. And the idea is, you know, you have to know every single blues style and every lick. And, you know, I think it's just way too much. You know, just take a step back, figure out what you're really good at, and do that to the best of your ability. And forget about having to do everything. You know, if you think about like In and Out, they've had the same business model for decades, and they're extremely successful. They know what they do, and they do it extremely well. You know, and you take other, you know, fast food franchises, and they try to do a little bit of everything, and consequently, you know, it all kind of sucks. You know, just figure out what you want to do, the direction you want to go, and don't be afraid to be repetitive. Just be really good at what you do. I strongly urge using your feet as much as possible. Get your feet involved. That's how you keep your time. That's how you keep your sense of rhythm and groove. It's really an underrated instrument, quote unquote. It's something that is just deep into the music that you don't always hear, but you feel it. If somebody is keeping time with their feet, it's felt. And, you know, if you have the ability to put a piece of wood or something under your feet so it's more audible, do that. You know, once you get your timing down, it's a great tool. I encourage everybody to sing. You know, even if you think you have no singing voice at all, keep working at it, right? You know, find some songs that you really like, you know, write the lyrics down, put them in a binder, practice them over and over and over, and try to come up with your own arrangements. And, you know, a lot of times the ones that are natural singers, I mean, that comes really easy for them, and they're off and running. But the ones that have to work harder at it, you know, you find your own voice. It's a unique voice that's different than everybody else's. So don't be afraid to dig in. It's going to make you a better guitar player. It's going to give you a better sense of music and how everything fits together. It's just a great thing for everybody to figure out and learn. I think over time, you know, the blues has become more about soloing and instrument prowess, you know, and impressing people with your knowledge of the instrument and just going on and on and on. And I think really this music is about telling a story and individuality and, you know, your shared experience through the music, you know, and it's more about the voice and the arrangement more than it is about some solo. I mean, a lot of these guys now just solo for 48 bars and you keep going on and on and just want to play everything they know. I think the blues is its best when it's done simply. So I hope this video gave everybody, you know, some ideas on how to change your tone, how to work with your tone, manipulate the tone using your right hand, some equipment ideas. And, you know, this isn't a sprint. This is a lifelong journey for most of us, you know. Don't be in a hurry. Just enjoy the process and just keep working at it, and you'll get where you want to go. I have a series of instructional videos on my YouTube channel. It should be under the lessons, or I think it's Chicago Blues Guitar Lessons tab or song list. There's several in there. They're free. You know, I know this video I jumped around a lot and didn't explain exactly what I was playing. I was just focused on tone and the right hand aspects of things. But if you want to dig deeper into, you know, left hand and different, you know, voicings and different licks and things like that, I encourage you to check out some of those lessons.